Bang ding ding, trademark. He come out 6'7" tall. Bang ding ding, one is star. Bang dong ding dong ding dong ding dong ding dong ding dong ding. This is a perfect day.
Woke up to the sound of the garbage truck again. Upstairs neighbor's toilet's leaking on my head. And cars broke down, I missed the bus, there runs a 10. I had a feeling this was a day to stay in bed. I finally left my pad right under Jumbo's cloud roof. A police officer pulled out his gun and said, I said, sir, you got the wrong guy. I guess it's just the perfect day. It's just the perfect day. Na, 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 na,
Hey everybody, welcome to the 2020 Eggy Awards. I am your host, Ryan Rogar, here with my co-host and other host, Michael Smith. We're here just like every year for the Eggy Awards, and thrilled to have you here.
Yeah, I'm excited. Can you believe it's been are we on our fourth year now?
It's fourth year. This is our third Eggies, if you can believe it.
Wow.
And it's been a lot of fun. Basically, for people who aren't longtime listeners to the Egg Show, the Eggy Awards are a quick show we put together every year that just sort of, circumnavigates the year in podcasting and takes some of the best and brightest shows, from the year and some of the best guests, people that we've had, what we think are maybe some of the most impactful conversations with, and we consolidate that down into one little clip show where you can get sort of the best of the year all in one handy location. We will, for the purposes of this show, be mostly focused on the winners of each of our categories. But do go back to the prior episode. You can learn a little bit more. The Christmas Eve show had a little bit of discussion as far as the different nominees and things like that. And obviously in the show notes, we have all the nominees and the winners episode listings so that you can go back and take a listen. I would say if you've got any extra time, if you're building a business, if you're trying to create a financial empire, if you want to start a tech company, if you want to write a book, whatever it is you want to do, you can stand to learn quite a bit from the people who've been on the show this year. And I would recommend going back and listening to whatever you can.
Yep. So I guess with that, our first category is authors. Do you want to tell us who was in that category?
Yep, you bet. So in the authors category, we had your nominees, Jay Massey of Cashflow Diary, episode 147. We had Steve Gordon, CEO of the Unstoppable Agency, episode number 150. And last but not least, Chris Tabish. He's the author of a book called Comediology. And this category, just like, and I'll try not to beat this into the ground on every category, was obviously very difficult to choose from. These top three were pretty incredible, but there were several others that popped up this year that we wish there was enough time to talk to pump up everybody. But there's got to be a winner, and this year's winner of the author category in the 2020 Eggy Awards is Chris Tabish. The conversation we had with Chris was, really stood out to me, maybe in part because he came to my house to tape it, which was kind of interesting.
Oh, I forgot that. Yeah.
Yeah. He happened to be in Salt Lake City and came by. So we set up a rig in my home for he and I to record. And then Mike was on the other end on Zoom. And but really interesting conversation. He basically was a stand-up comic who then took and applied stand-up comedy principles to business and came up with this book, Comediology. Incredible book, really interesting guy, and great conversation. I would encourage you to take a listen. That's episode 143. And tip of the cap to this year's Eggy Award winner in the author category, Chris Tabish.
Complete disillusion that you see something and it's an overnight success and they were just born lucky or fortunate. And I think I used to look at I used to look at life as, hey, you do, like you're in school, you do what the teacher tells everybody to do the same thing. And you do. So my philosophy starting work was you do what the quote unquote man tells you to do, and you do it better than your competition. And pretty soon you'll have a Lamborghini and a mansion and all that. I think that's the illusion. At least in my experience, I haven't seen anybody get success. If you're doing things that everyone else is doing, you're not going to get any more successful than they are and any more fulfilled. And so a lot of what I talk about in comediology is pointing the compass inward to what you really brings you joy, and invest in that in the heck in that. Just keep doing it. And because a couple of things will happen. One is you love to do it, so it's fun. Even getting up at 5 a.m., I would enjoy myself as much as a pain of getting up at 5 a.m. was. And because you enjoy it, you get really good at it. And people are like, whoa, after 5 years, you are going to be so much better than the average person. And yet it never feels like work to you. Like this, talking about this is like, oh my gosh, I'd much rather be doing this and, hanging out with my best friend. Sorry, best friend. But
Well, and I think both Mike and I can relate to that. Mike, feel free to jump in. Sorry for people listening to the show. Mike's not in the studio with us or in the house with us today. Also, because of bandwidth issues, we don't have video. So
and he was born without a tongue. No,
right. And so we're sort of talking over him because both Chris and I are in the same room, but Mike isn't. So yeah. Mike, feel free to jump in. Sorry. And I know you're trying not to step on us, but feel free to step on us because I don't want you to be totally ruled out of the conversation.
No, it's totally fine. I'm enjoying the conversation. Continue.
So anyway.
What were you going to say?
I don't know. I took that tangent. Now I don't remember.
Yeah.
So go ahead and finish it. I know you were thinking the same thing.
I was actually, you kind of glazed over the writing process of the book. You said you would get up and spend 15 minutes and it took you quite a while to do. How was it working with your co-author and having someone like Curtis, give you insight and feedback? Did he actually contribute to the book, or was he just kind of like a helper?
Oh yeah. So Curtis Matthews, just a little bit about this. This actually kind of talks to the point of using our different strengths. I'm definitely more of a steady Eddie kind of guy. Like every day at 5, I'm doing the book. So inherently that brings limits in terms of thinking outside of the box. So I know where I need to bring in a partner. So basically I finished the baseline of the book, and then I went to Curtis. Now Curtis is a mad genius. The guy is just, I mean, I probably can't say things on the air that he talks about, but he'll come out like, anyway. And so what I said, hey, Curtis, we really need to punch these things up. I need to, I've got the points in there I really want to emphasize, but I need to have some pizzazz. So he took it and he then punched up the material. So a 3-year process, he did his process in about 2 months, and we collaborated quite a bit. Do you think this is funny? Is it too much, etc.? And so it was a collaboration towards the end, but that's how we worked best together. If I were to get Curtis on a call every day, we would end up strangling each other. So,
sure.
But yeah, it's where we fit. And so I hope that answers the question, Mike.
Yeah. I'm just always curious about the creative process and how, working with other people, especially on something like a book, it's got to be really hard to kind of just come to the conclusion of the final product. I've thought about going down that road, and I've actually started twice, and I can never seem to get past the first chapter. I've got like a really good idea that I want to write about, but I get into it and then I get into my own head, and then I never actually progress with it. Like I have eternal writer's block.
Yeah. Well, and I think I experienced that. I know exactly what you're talking about. I literally experience that on a daily basis. So here, if I could offer you anything about writing, and in fact, this is a recommendation from comedy, and this is one thing that comedy helps in professionals. It's a process called ranting. So what you do is it's better if you write it. If you can type it, but there's magical about writing. I used to type my sets. I will write them because there's something magic that happens when you put your physical hand to a pen to paper. Anyway, what you do for 30 minutes, all you do is write, and you don't stop yourself. If it's just top of mind to the paper. The snow is white, blah, blah, blah. You don't worry about grammar. You don't worry about sentences. You don't worry about anything. You just write for 30 minutes. somewhere between 3 days and 2 weeks, you do this on a daily basis, your filter will be removed. And you have to be real careful. Don't be around your boss very long. It's like, just ideas will flow. Like it is like some kind of legal hallucinant, not drug that just frees your mind. And so that's what I did that quite a bit, just ranted. And remember this, the best advice that I got is the first edit, the first time you put it on paper, it's for you. Don't think about the audience. It's for you. Just have fun. Do what brings you joy. After that, the second time you go through it, then it's for the audience. And then you can refine and edit from there. But the first time, it's all about bringing the joy. I don't know if that helps, but that helped me. I had to go through that thought process on a regular basis.
All right. That was Chris Tavish, the author of Comediology, episode 143 on the Eggs podcast. Congratulations for winning the authors category. Up next, we have tech. So for the tech category this year, we have David Wax. He's the CEO of Handy Written. Brian Gill, the chairman of Gillware, episode 165. And Moesha Boykin Anderson, CEO of Antech Solutions, episode 176. All three of these interviews were great. I enjoyed all three of them, but as Ryan has mentioned before, we do have to pick a winner, which, is what it is. And this year's winner for the Tech Eggies Award is David Wax. The reason we decided to pick David is because A, the conversation was great, and B, it was interesting to hear the process he went through of developing the hardware involved in, teaching a computer to do handwriting and use a pen and get it to look like someone actually wrote it. And so he went from the ground up and made his own machines, his own software, and was able to come up with this company by using printer, like 3D printers. So it's pretty interesting. So I would highly recommend. Well, actually, we're going to play a clip so you can hear it now. David Watts is the winner of the Tech Eggy Award.
Absolutely.
Let's take a step back a little bit and get a little bit more of your history. We kind of glazed over that and went right into the topic and the website. What's your background? You worked in that text messaging platform, but prior to that, what did you do and how did you get into this space?
Yeah, how do you start making robots?
Yeah.
So I went to school. I graduated college in 2000 with degrees in engineering and business, always planning on kind of becoming an entrepreneur. But to pay off school, I needed to get a real job first. So I became a consultant for a company called, this was in the go-go 99 when everybody was starting .com startups. And so I worked for a company called Diamond Cluster that was helping large, boring corporations try to become startups on the inside. And I worked there for a few years, kind of doing the typical business analyst stuff, just being a spreadsheet monkey. And then went from there to being an investment banker, doing equity analysis, and I hated that. And then ended up in a venture capital firm in San Diego, working for a lunatic. And it was best story. Stories best told over multiple beers. But in addition to having my office bugged with like a garden owl that was secretly a video camera and just all sorts of crazy stuff, I only lasted there about 4 months and then got fired for something I had no knowledge of.
There was some the owl told on you?
Yeah, exactly. There was some stock transaction that the venture capitalist wasn't happy with that I had zero involvement in, but he came screaming in my office and blamed me for it. And anybody in San Diego knew this guy, this venture capitalist, and would have known that nobody would approve any stock transactions except him. So it was total bogus, but I got let go for it and kind of went home to Scottsdale, Arizona, where I grew up with my head between my legs because all those years after college, I worked very hard to pay off school debt, but I didn't save anything. Instead of saving a little nest egg, a rainy day fund, I didn't do any of that. I just kept paying down school debt with everything I had. So when stuff hit the fan and I needed to recoil and regroup, I didn't have any cushion to do that with. So I went home and lived in a apartment that my father lent me, and over drinks, coffees, I guess, we were thinking of what types of businesses we could start, and we decided. And he actually had the idea of using BlackBerries or barcodes to get information on houses. This is before the iPhone came out. So I said, well, I don't know about BlackBerries and barcodes, but why not cell phones and text messages? Excuse me. So that's where my first company, a company called Sell It, came about. We were the first provider of text-in for information on houses with a service we called House for Sell. And I quickly realized I wanted to be more than just House for Sell. So then we got into doing texting for retailers and Chicago Tribune and that type of thing. And really, it was the classic story of a guy sitting at his computer with a 2-liter jug of Mountain Dew and programming for 6 months on end or 8 months on end, and then releasing a minimally viable product.
What was that? You sitting on the computer programming, or was that someone else that you paid to?
No, that was me. That was me writing some very bad code.
Dude, I feel your pain. I've been down this road.
Yeah. So I did that, and what's crazy and a little, looking back, because this latest venture hasn't accelerated that quick, it all happened rather quickly. Like, I did it for about 9-10 months, sitting at that empty apartment, got a few clients, and then quickly, like a few realtor clients. And then I got noticed by Marie Claire magazine because they were looking to do a text-in for information campaign on products in their magazine. And I said, well, it's basically House for Sell, just replace houses with cosmetics and we're done. So I sold it to them for a lot more money than I was selling it to the realtors. And I was able to move back to Chicago to be with my girlfriend at the time, and the business was off and running. And then I sold the company 7 years later to a company called ePrize, which was kind of in the online promotions and sweepstakes industry. We
lost him. He said the internet connection is unstable.
To Hello World. So that's how I made the money that I'm now spending on handwritten, or investing in handwritten. Handwritten's been around for about 6 years now. So what happened was when I finished up my role at ePrize or Hello World or Sell It or whatever you want to call the last role, basically the next day I turned around and I started handwritten. And it started just like the first one, with me sitting at a desk, this time not writing the software. Instead, a lot of the software got outsourced. I had just read The 4-Hour Workweek, which was a good book. So I tried to implement some of those tactics. I know, grumble, but I did implement some of those, and I was able to bring in some workers through a website called Upwork. And strangely, some of them are still with me today. The scope of handwritten is much bigger than Sell It was. And the reason is we have iPhone apps and Android apps and a very robust website and then an API and all that. And so there, the only coding I've done is to actually run the robots, which I can talk about, because everything else I feel is kind of table stakes. You got to have it. And it's not really that proprietary, but there's a lot of it. There's a lot of moving parts. And then we have Salesforce integration and HubSpot integration and Zapier integration and all these things. So I didn't write any of that. I'm the lead architect, and I sit down with the developers or Skype them and tell them what to do and how I want it to look. But what I have programmed is the actual robot. And it is a robot. It has a robotic arm. And there's orchestration that's needed when you're dealing with 90 of these. So, every time you roll out a new software release, you have to push it to these robots. And really that's the secret sauce of handwritten, is the software and the robots instead of anything else. So
can you actually maybe dive into that a little bit for us, like the learning curve it took to actually develop the first one, how you came about it? I'm sure like just the behind the scenes amount of craziness that goes on developing a robot is got to be insane.
Yeah. So I want to be careful because I don't want to say anything too insulting to the company we used prior to the robots, but we used an off-the-shelf, really kind of the only off-the-shelf handwriting machine prior to, and they were who I started with when I started handwritten. We wrote all the software for the front-end websites and the APIs and all that. And then when the orders came in, I would just push them to these machines that we bought from a company in Virginia. But what I found was the company in Virginia had a very interesting governance structure over there, and they weren't willing to sell me enough robots for me to scale. I kept saying, let me buy these highly overpriced robots off you, and they said, well, you're only limited to 4. So then I started a second company and said, well, sell this company 4 more. And they did. And then they said they wouldn't sell that company anymore. And if they found out I was doing this, and it just didn't become scalable. And then on top of that, the robots had all sorts of weird flukes with them where they would literally write on themselves. So instead of writing on the paper, the pen would write on the metal of the robot. And they'd run out of ink and just start writing empty pages. And every robot had to be controlled. You can only control, I think, 8 robots with 1 computer. So you needed a whole bunch of computers to support your robot growth. The robots were insanely expensive for what we were doing. So for all these reasons, I kept turning to my employees and saying, well, we're going to build our own robots. You just watch. We're going to build it. I had no knowledge on how to build a robot. But what we did was we took an off-the-shelf writing arm called an AxiDraw, which you can buy for like $400. And we used that as the main, I'm probably sharing too much here, but we used the AxiDraw as the main writing arm of our robot. The thing with the AxiDraw is kind of twofold, though. Number one, it can draw, but it can't really write. So trying to get it to like where you type in a whole bunch of words and have it write that out, it doesn't do that. If you were to draw out all the letters on one page, it could do that, but it couldn't recreate typed in text. So the software that I wrote handles all that, and it does it extremely well, I will say. And then the other thing with the AxiDraw is it doesn't have any sort of paper handling mechanism. So if you're looking to feed, unlike our competitor, which went out of business, basically the way they worked is they would put a piece of paper down, and then the robot arm would draw on it or write on it, and then they'd lift that paper up, put another one down, and do it over and over again. But I mean, that's ridiculous to have somebody standing there and replacing paper after paper. So we spent something like 2 years before we were able to get our first automated robot out the door that incorporated a control board and the AxiDraw writing arm and a large functional paper feed mechanism. And we're still kind of refining it to this day, but it's been a crazy process of getting that whole thing down and just learning how to build a robot and bringing in people. We have Arizona State University not too far away here, and we've hired a bunch of mechanical and electromechanical engineers from ASU to build these and refine them. And one of my early engineers said, some of these parts that are made out of metal that cost $400, you could 3D print. So I was like, okay, well, let's try that. And we'd buy a $500 3D printer on Amazon. And we were able to print over $500 of parts in one robot. So for every robot we built, it paid for that 3D printer. So I thought, wow, this is fantastic. Let's, continue down this path. And we started 3D printing everything, which ended up being a bad idea. So then we backed off, and we've invested in very expensive laser cutters, in addition to very, very high-end 3D printers that serve particular purposes for different parts. And really, we've been able to cut out a huge amount of metal from these robots that we build. And now the machines are really very, very custom. And everything in the robot is very custom, and most of it is grown or cut in-house. So it's been a really interesting process. And then just the continual refinements on it, so that getting more pages through the system and less intervention and that type of thing. It's been fun.
I can imagine.
That was David Wax, the CEO of Handywritten. He was the winner of the tech category here at the 2020 Eggy Awards. Obviously, that was just a snippet of what you might find if you go back and listen to that whole episode, number 142. But I would encourage you to do so. I mean, it was a really deep conversation, tons of layers to it, and I think there was a lot of practical information there for anybody who's starting a business, really of any variety, but especially in the tech space. The next category we're going to talk about in the 2020 Eggy Awards is the marketing category. This is one of the more difficult categories to try to find, nominees for and everything. And the reason was just we had so many dang great marketers come on the show this year. Obviously, I mean, it's a crowded space, and there were a lot of great competitors, but we were able to narrow it down to 3 top nominees, and they go something like this. The first nominee is Carmen Pyrie. He is the founder at Kula Partners. It was episode 168 of the Eggs podcast. Great conversation with Carmen. You're going to want to check it out. The next nominee is Ritus Purins, who's the head of marketing at Printful, an online print-on-demand company. They're episode number 148. And the third and final nominee of the marketing category was Greg Hickman, the CEO at Alt Agency, episode 173. So, drum roll. Okay, Mike doesn't actually have to put a drum roll in. I'm just joking.
I actually do.
But
I will.
But the winner of the category is Greg Hickman. Greg came on the show, and this show was interesting for a couple of reasons. I mean, obviously, the content was incredible. Greg is a treasure trove of ideas and information that are really useful and practical for anybody in business, but especially anybody who's trying to market or promote their business. It was a great conversation. The other interesting aspect of that show is it is one of maybe 2 or 3 shows since we started in 188 episodes that I've done without Mike. And so it was an interesting experience because, you get kind of used to having your partner there to kind of bail you out on occasion. But for that episode, I didn't have him. And luckily, Greg is such a great guest that he carried the show. So anyway, the winner of the marketing category, once again, is Greg Hickman, the CEO of Alt Agency, episode 173. And here is a quick little clip from that episode.
I spent, and when I look back on it, and this is what we kind of teach a lot of our clients, because I see them doing the same thing. We're so afraid to lose revenue, the revenue that we had, that we weren't focusing enough on the new direction. And I spent easily 4 to 6 months trying to reconfigure the plans that we had with our existing clients so that we could become more profitable and make it better. But I spent too much time focusing on the old instead of the new. And that is what primarily delayed the transition. And I had hired a coach somewhere within this window of time, and I was kind of expressing what was going on. And we kind of really broke it out onto a spreadsheet. And I wasn't even really sure how profitable each client was. So I went through like a 30 to 60 day experience where we were me and the team got really good at tracking our time across all these clients. And lo and behold, we find out that, 5 or 6 of them equal 80% of our bandwidth. And when you kind of equate our total time spent on them, we were actually losing money on all six, like 5 or 6 of them. And so like we were losing money on most of some of our key business, yet they were also taking up 80% of our bandwidth. And so like once I kind of saw those numbers, I just realized like there's no plan I'm going to make at this point for these guys where it doesn't feel like I'm just pulling the rug out from underneath their feet. It's like, it's not, there's no win-win here. Like I can't be like, hey, keep paying me the same, but you get half the work. Cause like we were way over delivering. And like, that was the expectation that they got it when we talked about it. But when we talked about where we would transition to, it just didn't make sense to continue on. And so once I saw the numbers, I was like, oh, like this is why like we have no capacity. This is why this isn't working. And you know, the coach that I had at the time, and actually kind of one interesting element of this was one of my clients was a coach, and had previously coached me and made a comment. He's like, I'm telling you this as a coach, not as like one of your clients. He's like, because what I'm about to tell you will suck for me as a client. He's like, you can't keep growing your business this way. Like if you want true freedom, scalability, leverage, like you need to get out of the done for you services. And he's like, I know that means I'm going to need to find someone new. He's like, hopefully like when you decide to do this, you'll help us find that person. And we did. Like he was the client that we took like 6 months to transition out of. And we had a couple of those like 3 to 6 months transition plans. And that's kind of what it took. So, you know, it was definitely hard. Still, there was a lot of overworking because you're kind of running these two different models, you know, just because I didn't want to burn any bridges. Sure. But, yeah, I mean, by no means would I say it was pretty, but it was like what needed to be done. It could have been done faster if I had the data in front of me. And I would say, you know, I would say there was a lack of discipline until I saw the numbers, and then I just zoned in.
No, I think that's good to hear. And I think I appreciate you sharing that story, because I think it's good to understand that, you know, this isn't as easy as they say, you know, I mean, just because, I mean, we prefaced our 5 1s with the idea that, you know, this is the fastest way to 7 figures. Yeah. So it kind of makes it sound simple, or makes it sound straightforward. Right. So I think it's good to sort of hear about the ups and downs.
Focusing on those things for a year is like what everyone gets hung up on. And it's funny because I get it all the time. Because so many of the clients that we work with, you know, they serve multiple verticals, multiple niches, avatars, and they're so hung up on the fact that if they only were to serve one of them, they can't grow. Like their business won't survive if they only serve that one type of person, when it's like, that is the furthest thing from the truth. In 99.9% of cases, like you're never niche down like that far, at least the people that we deal with. And it's like, they just assume that by offering less or by serving fewer types of people that they won't be able to grow, but like they're not growing to where they want to be, where they're at right now either. And it's like, they're just looking so far off into the future that like they haven't like rolled it back to actual specifics. And when you do that, like almost everyone's goals are way achievable by serving less types of people and selling less things. Hands down.
All right, that was Greg Hickman. He's the CEO of Alt Agency, episode 173. Really enjoyed that conversation, even though I wasn't a part of it. It was nice to listen back through it and hear some of the highlights.
Yeah, that's what he says, but I'm already standing around waiting to receive the email with all of Mike's critiques.
Do this, do that, do this.
That's right. We'll improve together.
Up next for the Eggy Awards, we are in the finance category. And this is one of those categories that we had a lot of good quality candidates, and we had to narrow it down to 3. And those 3 are John Stoy, founder of Verbatim Financial, Mark Willis, the author and owner. He's an author and the owner of Lake Growth Financial. Derek Van Ness, who is a wealth strategist. And, out of those three, it was hard to narrow it down because I enjoyed all three of them. But the person that we chose for this year's Finance Eggy Award was John Stoy. Really enjoyed the conversation with John. He just had a wealth of knowledge and was very relatable. Here's a little clip from that show. Hope you enjoy it.
Yeah, well, so maybe let's take a little bit of a transition. Like we've alluded to. I mean, we are taping now, right? Amid crisis, in the middle of this, COVID pandemic. But there's all the, financial and economic stuff going on right now. The economy is basically ground to a halt, not just here in the States, but globally. And so I wonder, as somebody with a background in finance, if we couldn't maybe shift our conversation a little bit to, how do we weather this storm? Whether it's through financial planning or through innovation and identifying opportunities, or, whatever strength you've got in this field. I think it might be interesting to sort of talk about this new world and what's going on in it.
Well, and
thanks.
On that same topic, I've heard that now is actually a really good time to invest, just because it's going to do nothing but go up from where it's sitting right now. Can you maybe highlight some of that in your response as well?
Sure. So what I will say is that the financial advisory business is sadly dominated by sales, right? People are trying to sell products to customers. The products being financial, could they be stocks, mutual funds, you name it, insurance. But even financial advisors such as myself who do planning more so than investment advisory per se, we also have to sell because we're selling our services. We're selling the value that, what's the value of having a financial advisor, sort of on your personal payroll. And the only time that you don't have to sort of work super hard to sell as a financial advisor, I think are in periods like this, periods of extreme disruption, because even though I was not acting as a professional advisor for personal finance 10 years ago during the financial crisis, I got calls from people I hadn't heard from in years. What should I do? You're in this business. Don't you understand? Should I buy? Should I sell? And, over the last month, the same thing has happened. Now it's 10 years in between. None of these people had called me in between practically, right? But I actually got a message popped up on my Facebook feed. It was from a friend of mine, and I interact with him, a little bit online mostly. He lives in a different state. And I looked at the timestamp on the last message he sent me. It was literally in 2009, and he was asking me what to do with his stocks in 2009 because the market had crashed. He messaged me again. What do I do? And it's so people tend to realize that, right? Like you guys asked, is this an opportunity? Should I invest now? The thing is that none of us know anything. I have you might be able to see it on the video feed, but I have this banner behind my desk in my office. It says nobody knows anything, and when my clients see that, I try to. They'll giggle because they understand if they've spoken with me that. I try to tell them that none of us can know what's going to happen in the future, right? We don't know what the market's going to do. My crystal ball is a lot like the Liberty Bell. It's cracked. It doesn't work. So what I want to do and what I like to, help my clients do is control what we can control, right? Think about what you have to deal with, and that includes. In this instance, hopefully having an emergency fund that you can lean on during these times of stress, being allocated correctly amongst your savings and investments as it relates to where you are in life, because Like, for instance, I've had friends of mine who, in all other periods of time that I've known them, say, let's just say for the last decade, they've been big fans of just keep investing, buy and hold, just keep the costs low and invest. And it's worked, right? It's worked because the market's gone up for the past 10 years, basically, until last month. And now those same people that had bought into what is basically what you should do, just keep saving, keep investing, and prepare for the point in time in your life when you're going to need that money. They're calling me and saying, should I sell everything? Should I go to all cash? Is the market going to hit bottom? When's the bottom? And I have to keep telling them, I don't know. Do you know? Why would you? And then I ask them a series of questions. Why would you think you knew? And they'll send me these articles on the internet that are from the internet that tell them that all the doom and gloom articles, right? Yeah. And then I can combat that, but I can send them back an article that's too optimistic as well, right? We don't know what's going to happen.
So how can you how can you just kind of make an informed decision and go, because you don't know, but you've got the doom and gloom on one hand and you've got now's the perfect time on the other. How do you proceed?
Okay. Yeah. So the idea would be, in an ideal world, you have a financial plan for yourself that you've thought about. You could make it on your own. There's plenty of sources on the internet for good ways and books that you could get how to make your own financial plan, or you could be working with a financial planner, such as myself. The idea is to come up with a plan that you are happy with, that, again, it works for the period you are in your life. So if you're in your 30s and you're sort of beginning your real savings process, you're finally getting to the point where you're in a job where you're making enough money to save a decent amount, and the market goes down as it does, as it has, over the last month. It makes you nervous, of course. It's disappointing, yes, but you try to remember that statistically these corrections happen every 5 to 7 years. The last bull market of 10 years that was the longest one ever, and historically it has gone back up. Now, any time could be different, right? But what we don't know what would make this time different. So what can you control? You can control how much you're continuing to save. And again, if you're in your 30s, you're not going to need that money that you're saving for retirement for quite a bit of time. So if you're double-digit years out from retiring, then you really shouldn't even worry about it, because when you worry about it, you make decisions, right? And this applies to anything in life, not just finance, but when you're making decisions out of emotion versus sort of objective analysis, that's when the mistakes get made. And that's why most individual investors, when they try to pick stocks, they lose. And frankly, it's why most active money managers don't outperform the market either, because they're either forced by their clients to make moves during a down market like what's happening now, or humans can't predict the future. So it doesn't matter how much analysis you do. You think you've looked into a company and that company is going to go to the moon. The chances of you finding enough of those, even if you're right that one time, the chances of you finding enough of them to outperform the market on a regular basis is extremely small.
Well, there you had it. That was John Stoy, the winner of the finance category for the 2020 Eggy Awards. He's the founder of Verbatim Financial and appeared on the Eggs podcast, episode 151. If you liked what you heard in that clip, I highly recommend you go back and take a full listen. Like Mike said, John has become sort of a champion of the show. He is a great asset and constantly promoting the content we're putting out. Really grateful to have had him on this show, and I think you'll really benefit from taking a listen to what he had to say. The last primary category of the Eggy Awards is the CEO category, or something we call business leadership category. Basically, this category, not to keep beating this drum, was obviously very difficult to fill. We spoke to numerous CEOs and business leaders this year, and each one of them, could easily have walked away with this award. Ultimately, we had to narrow it down to 3, and they go a little something like this. The first nominee is Tony Guarnaccia. Tony is the founder and CEO at Small Steps Build Profits. It's a business consultancy, episode number 170. Really great guest. I think you would definitely like to go back and take a listen. The second nominee is Bill Coletti, CEO at Kith. He's episode number 161. Also, just a great candidate, a great nominee, and certainly could walk away with this award. The third and final nominee in this category is Kathy Bowman. She's the CEO of Latitude Group, episode number 171. And as has been the case in all of these categories, really difficult to pick a winner. Obviously, any one of them could have walked away with this. But this year's winner of the 2020 Eggy Award for Business Leadership is none other than Kathy Bowman. Kathy, as I mentioned, is the CEO of the Latitude Group, episode number 171 on the Eggs podcast. She is a brilliant business leader, and I really appreciated her candor and sort of just tough attitude when we were talking to her. I felt like she had a great handle on business and did a really good job explaining to us some of the practicalities and some of the things that one must do to grow their company. I thought the conversation was amazing. And again, for anybody who listened to the Christmas Eve teaser episode, in full transparency, the coffee mugs she sent us afterwards did not factor into this decision. It was a juried panel of me and Mike, and there were no favorites here. So, but thanks so much to Kathy. That was a great podcast, great show, and she was really amazing. So stay tuned for a quick little clip from that show.
So let's talk a little bit about one thing that you sort of talked about in your introduction there, this idea of recognizing potential and in small businesses, especially for a lot of companies, they might kind of look at strategic planning as for, the big guys or whatever. And I think especially for young entrepreneurs, it often gets overlooked. It's this idea of, jump in with both feet and we'll figure out the plan later. And so I wonder if you talk a little bit about just sort of, I guess the importance of strategic planning and the role that it plays in developing a small business, but also how we might recognize in our own business that we need this.
Great question. I would say a couple of things. For entrepreneurs, people that are just starting out, a business, I do think that it's been my experience that they need to tackle this great, huge, humongous strategic planning process. That's not what a new entrepreneur starting a new business needs. You need a business plan. You need a pragmatic plan that sets out a financial roadmap for the next year and maps out the things that you have to do to get that business off the ground, to get it running. So that's really about basic, fundamental sort of blocking and tackling kind of things for a small business that they need to do. It doesn't need to be some huge thing with a ton of goals and action plans and all of that for new business. Right, but there does need to be a roadmap, and so that's what we help people do. From there, what my company really focuses on, yes, it is small businesses, but it's established businesses that have a goal, privately held. Usually, we're talking $25 to $200 million, which those are still small businesses, of course, as you know, Ryan.
That's small.
And so,
what?
Yeah, that's small. That's small. And we have a light versions for smaller ones, but that's what you're doing. But how do they know that they need that? Here's the thing: there's not a business in this world that doesn't need that. I'm just going to tell you that right up, because, people say, well, things are going great. So, everything's going great. And I say to these people, then to what end? If they're going great, what are you doing to leverage that? What are you doing to make sure that momentum keeps going, to put the things in place that you need to leverage that to its greatest end? And how are you going to know, what you need to do with that, right? Okay, it's going great. So what are the triggers that tell me when things may not be going to be going so great, so that I can see those ahead of time? In those kind of things. It's great if it's going great, but you still may be sub-optimizing. So people need a plan to do that. Again, it doesn't have to be, this big convoluted thing. We do not hand people a big book to put on the shelf that says, here's your business plan. They have their plan. If they want it on a piece of paper, we can give it to them on one piece of paper. But most everything now is done online. We have a portal. They have a project management tool. Whatever goals and action plans they have are in there. They can update them in real time. We have monthly business reviews. We have signal lights that says red, yellow, or green, tells them how they're doing against it. So it's just a really easy process. There's not any big books or anything like that.
So you're looking for a more established business that's, got X amount of income coming in. When they come to you, what's your first step? What do you analyze with them to put a plan together?
Well, before we start putting a plan together, that is a great question, Mike. Thank you for asking it, because it's different than what most people think. Our process is not about that. The first thing we want to know is, for the business owner or the business leader, whoever's in charge and responsible, what do you want this business to be? What do you want to get out of this business? You got to have that commitment first to know where they want it. It's their business. They put in the equity or the sweat equity. So you got to figure out what they want to get out of this. They have to have a commitment to it. So that's the first step. Once we figure that out, and the second thing is, what are you willing or not willing to do to get there? In other words, what are your values? There's some things that, we could do to get there, but we're not going to do it because it violates what we think is important, what our values are. So we don't spend any time sitting around, contemplating your navel or wordsmithing values. We have a way to get there that's pretty simple and easy, but also authentic and down to earth. And so we get those set. And so then the second thing we ask those business owners or leaders is, okay, how committed are you to this process? Because if internally you're not committed to be the leader and to hold people accountable and help people understand that this is a part of your job and that this is important, that it's not just some other theme or project initiative, flavor of the month that we're doing over here and your real job is over here. If you don't have that, we have great processes and tools. We know how to facilitate this. We know how to help you put together a plan. But if you don't have that, you're going to sub-optimize at best. So are you willing to make that commitment to really be the leader internally to drive that plan? And then the third thing we want to know before we'll even talk about starting a strategic planning process is, is are you willing to commit to at least a year? In other words, once we develop that plan, we're going to move into execution mode. A lot of people develop plans, put them on the shelves or stick them now, obviously, in that portal over there that they never go look at again. But we're working on the execution. We're there with them because the minute the ink dries on that proverbial plan, things start changing. You're never executing at the end of the year that plan that we developed in month one. But you've got a roadmap to be changing those things. So we're looking for that kind of commitment. And then before we start, we tour facilities if they have multiple facilities or a location, whatever it may be, and we interview people across the business. Business leaders, no matter how open they are, how welcoming they are, how open their door is for employees to come in, employees down in the organization know things that they don't. And we need to know that to help them to develop that right plan. So all of that takes place before we come in and start saying, okay, fill out these templates, tell us this about your markets and your products, your services, your competition, all of that kind of stuff. And we start whittling down to the plan.
Yeah, I like that. I'm listening to a book right now called Start With Why.
I know that book.
Yeah, I think he uses a case study with United Airlines where a CEO was horrible. He had the whole top floor locked off, and the huge security guards, only people with certain access could get up to the top and talk to him. And then the new CEO came in and made it employees first. And then he'd actually go down and throw bags with the baggage handlers to actually hear what's going on and get them working. And he totally redid the whole business by having that mindset. So I like that you go and you actually interview the lowest on the rung and then work your way up and figure everything out. So it makes complete sense. All right. That was Kathy Bowman, CEO of Latitude Group, and really enjoyed that clip. So we have a little more that we're going to add to this award show that aren't really criteria specific. They're kind of the miscellaneous awesome conversations that we had over the year.
Yeah. So anybody who listens to the Egg Show knows obviously we cover a broad swath of guests from all kinds of different walks of life. And, these guys didn't necessarily fit in one of these buckets, but nonetheless, they're going to receive sort of a special mention award because they were standout shows from over the course of the year that I think are, definitely worth paying attention to. And, going back and listening to, because, for one reason or another, I think they were really valuable shows.
Yeah. And to start off the special mention category, I picked Yukon Smitty. His real name's Randy Smith. He's a mining legend up in Nome, Alaska. And I met him while I was up there. And it was actually a last minute kind of deal. We weren't really planning on recording having that conversation at all. It just kind of happened. I had my laptop and he was there, I was there, and was like, hey, let's sit down and record this. So I used my iPhone and used my laptop, and I set it up kind of in the middle of us so it would pick up the audio. So not the best quality, but it ended up being a 4.5 hour conversation. We had to take a bathroom break halfway through. So that tells you how long it was. But essentially, it wasn't the normal, egg show. It was just talking about his career and his life. And he worked for Lockheed Martin. He worked for a lot of, kind of really cool secret clearance kind of stuff in the mining industry that you wouldn't really think were part of that. But his dad worked on Skunk Works and was a pilot. And, his career in mining has taken him all over the world. And some of the stories that we discuss in that 4-hour conversation are just mind-boggling. So I'm going to pick a section that I really enjoyed and play that clip for you now. So enjoy. Here's Yukon Smitty.
A lot of companies, mining companies that have started up, they bring in a lot of, in fact, I know of a guy, why, I don't know why he's doing it. You'd think he would spend some time here and talk to some people and pay attention to people that paid some dues, but he's having a big barge shipped up here, just like, Sean's big barge, or maybe not as big as that one, but the one that Christine Rose is on. Mm-hmm. He just bought a big excavator from one of the other guys here.
Trying to create a setup like that.
And he's going to do another Christine Rose. And I go, dude, they've already outworked most of the areas they can reach, And he said, well, I got a longer stick. And I said, a longer stick on an excavator means you can get out another, maybe
10 feet.
Yeah. And I said, and then there's problems with that because now you don't have the leverage, the breakout force, you don't have a lot of other things to do with a short stick.
Yeah.
And, and so if he thinks the cost of, he's already whining, he sold a trucking company in California because they passed these, emission tier laws. It has to be I can't remember, tier 5 now or something in California, which means all these perfectly good engines and trucks and everything else are all getting surplus and sold to other states. And, I guess eventually it helps people in California have better air, which is great, but at the same time, look at the cost. And anyway, he said he can't afford to buy new engines and trucks, and so he sold his trucking company, but he's just going to totally throw it away here.
Yeah.
There's other ones you could buy already built,
Yeah.
And the cost of a barge and an excavator is only, I'm not going to say a small part, it's significant, but it's only part of the thing. If he's already whining about that, the time
Just getting it up here, and the cost of fuel up here, and then
man, it's just, and the logistics. How are you going to get the excavator onto the barge? How are you going to get the barge, does it have a landing ramp that you can get it up on? You're going to have it craned up. What are you going to do? How are you going to mount it? Do you have welders? Do you have fitters? Do you have, who's going to do your equipment balance on it? Who's going to do your float test? How are you going to, you haven't designed anything. Where's your holding areas for your fuel?
there's so much thought process that hasn't gone into
and he doesn't even have a wash plant or recovery system, let alone a cleanup system. And people look at a small dredge or something like that, and they go, "Oh, that's simple. I can do that. I can build that out of scrap."
I look at what Ian's dredge is, and I'm like, I couldn't have done that he evidently just the process of getting to where he has now is the due diligence and the time served to get to what he has. If I were to come up and try and piece together a barge without knowing anything, a sluice box or anything like as I sit now, I wouldn't be able to do it. So Ian has my utmost respect for what he lived on the beach for a while, and he just kind of scrapped together. So I heard you actually met him just by you showed up at his tent.
I had met Scott before, and Scott is one I went to see, and he had come up with Scott, and that's where I met him there on the beach in the tent. And several people originally, that's what they would do. It's the most portable thing you can ship is a tent, and so you live on the beach, and now they've outlawed all that and made it pretty difficult. But then there used to be hooches on the beach. These guys build, we call them pallet palaces. They take these pallets and screw them together, nail them together, and make little shelters, and put blue tarps over them. And, they were scared. They were all up and down the beach here. But that's all been cleaned up pretty much.
Has the show caused a problem with that? Do you think a lot of people have come up thinking they're going to
Yes, it really has. You've got a lot of newbies that, like this guy, he's going to spend some serious money, and he's going to lose it. It's a foregone conclusion that they saw self-fulfilling prophecy, really.
Yeah.
Because number one, he hasn't done his homework. Number two, he has no background with that homework. He has no experience. Entering into a brand new industry, there's a heck of a learning curve.
Yeah.
I don't know how good he is at construction and design and so forth, but you just don't throw an excavator on a barge. There's no superstructure for it.
Yeah.
You've got to make sure that's all in place and intact and balanced, and or your barge is going to be listing one of the ways or the other.
Well, and also like the sluice box itself, if you're listing to one side, it's not going to catch gold correctly.
That's right.
So
it's going to flush out the gold you did collect already, and that's one of this oscillation and stuff and the pitching. It's all factors on capturing gold. And going back to the jigs that I spoke about earlier, not a lot of people understand those, and yet the old industry, the oldest jigs that I know of were made right around the in the early teens in the 1900s. I found one once that was made out of wood with leather bellows.
Really?
In it.
And the leather's probably rotted by now.
Yeah, and it was really unique. But the same principle was there. And then they built them originally. The jigs were built for mill type ore, where you're crushing it in ball mill, rod mill, whatever, and getting it really fine. And then they would take it and run it through these pulsing beds, and then they would recirculate it too, and purge and enter in new material. And so it would get several cycles, through, and they could get down to in a controlled environment where it's, everything's stable and so forth. You could fine tune them, and they were getting very high recovery rates. Gold was down into the 325 mesh range. They could still pull it at a 90-95% recovery, or even better in some cases. Well, that's gold that you can't hardly see in a pan, And if you got several flicks, together, you might be able to see them. But
well, there you have it. That was Yukon Smitty. I think, like Mike said, leading up to this clip, I think this show, I mean, obviously it doesn't fit the format of Eggs, and it was something that Mike and I got together and decided, absolutely just needed to be heard. You don't have the opportunity to speak with people who have had such a breadth of life. This guy, covered so much ground and has done so many amazing and interesting things that, guys like him are just one day going to be a relic of the past that you just don't even think of. And so I was really grateful for Mike to have an opportunity like that. It's, not to be too cliche, but it was solid gold. And
yeah, well, if you noticed, he has a really raspy voice, and it's kind of hard to understand him sometimes, and that's because he has throat cancer. So we don't know how much longer he's going to be around, and I'm just really appreciate that I was able to have that conversation with him when I could.
Yeah, for sure. It'll be a legacy to him, and obviously it's a legacy for this show too. It was a great opportunity. And honestly, I'm going to have to go back and look. I'm not sure if I think he probably beat out John Edney from OPM, who last year, maybe that's been 2 years ago now, was the prior holder of the longest episode award. I think his show might have been about 3 hours or something.
And we broke that into two. Yeah, two episodes. And we actually left this one full. So get your, popcorn and sit down for a long conversation.
Yep, this is a road tripper for sure.
Yep.
So the next special mention that we've got for you is Thais Gibson. She's the founder at the Personal Development School. It's episode 163. The reason I chose her, and actually Mike and I were in consensus about her, is our episode, we have a lot of conversations with a lot of people about a lot of things, but it's mostly, designers, CEOs, business founders, these kinds of people. And the conversations that we typically have are pretty straightforward. It's, about business, about finance, it's about whatever. Well, our conversation with Thais was a little different because of this personal development component. We've joked before that, you can tell what kinds of things Mike and I are going through by the type of guests we have on the show. So if we need to learn more about finance, we have more finance guests on. If we need to learn more about marketing, we have marketers on. And with Thais, I thought it was an interesting conversation because we, sort of went deep and actually maybe opened up more sort of emotionally than maybe any other episode. Not to say that we were sitting around bawling into our hat or anything, but we had this great conversation. We really talked, in more of a personal way, I guess, in the interest of sort of being transparent and being sort of vulnerable in that moment as we were going through these different aspects of personal development. And I thought that made that episode special. So anyway, that was episode number 163. Here's a clip, take a listen, and then go back and listen to the whole dang thing. Enjoy Thais Gibson.
relationships?
100%. You know what I would say? I've seen thousands of people at this point, either in one-on-one sessions, group sessions, workshops, and there is a common thread where people, if they are not taking care of themselves and they're overly selfless, those are the people I've seen, at least as a pattern from my end, they get sick. And I think there's a huge important component in anything that you want to do to have proper boundaries, to have proper self-care rituals and routines, and know what fills your cup, because you literally cannot give what you don't have. And I think as a person, I actually went through that transformation and learned that, where I was, taught to a certain degree in childhood, like, self-sacrifice, that's what you're supposed to do, show up for everybody else. And until I learned how to actually build a relationship to myself and take care of myself and have time cut out, it's my alone time, my self-reflection time, healing just wasn't a possibility.
Yeah, no, I think that makes sense. And, even using your example of sort of opiate addiction, maybe moving from addiction to non-addiction to then be able to, I guess, get your mind clear and be capable of finding yourself is sort of one step there. And, but I think even for the average person, like you said, so many of us are busy taking care of each other just sort of naturally. That's how we were sort of built, is that we're busy looking out for the other person instead of looking out for ourselves. And, even there might even be some sort of social construct around that where we feel like it's selfish to take care of ourselves. And so I wonder, would you just sort of talk about sort of the different aspects of a relationship in general? And I think some of these will probably apply to self and other people, but are there sort of some tools or some things that we should be looking at in terms of how to, A, I guess, sort of evaluate the relationship we presently have with ourselves, and then B, how we can sort of, make some motion forward and see if we can actually start healing?
Absolutely. So there's a certain set of steps I take people through inside the school specifically. And the first thing is understanding your needs. We all have subconscious needs, and they start with our 6 basic human needs, which are certainty, novelty, contribution, growth, love and connection, and significance. And these things are things that we're wired for. And then those sort of branch out into our personality needs. And we all have these subconscious needs that we identify with our sense of self. So they're basically strategies to get those 6 basic human needs met. So just an example would be, let's say you have a really high personality need for family. And maybe you consider yourself a family man, and maybe you talk about your family a lot and you identify that as a big part of your sense of self. Well, that's actually a subconscious strategy to get the deeper unconscious need for love and connection met. And you've just built in the most positive versus negative associations to getting your needs met through family. And so that's how we sort of develop our identity. And we all have like a hierarchy of our top 5 or 6 personality needs that really impacts how fulfilled we feel. And literally, this is what fulfillment is. Fulfillment is when our personality needs are met, they're filled. And so when we don't know what those things are, when we're not aware of them, when we're living out of alignment with them, it's actually one of the root causes for how we can experience depression or anxiety, because the subconscious mind elicits emotional reactions and it says, hey, there's a need unmet. And that comes from a survival perspective, right? Like, we're supposed to feel bad when needs are not met. That's how we've adapted and survived and, gone and gotten food and shelter and evolved for so long. But now when we're living in this world where we don't have those basic things we're struggling for, it really can create an emotional problem when we have our personality needs unmet. And one of the really challenging things is, like, most people don't even know what those are. Most people don't realize how that's impacting them. And so much of our productivity is based on that, because when we're living out of alignment with those things, the first thing that happens is we start procrastinating, we start self-sabotaging, we start feeling negative, we start blaming, and then we start creating stories around that in our thought patterns. Like, oh, why is life so hard? Why is this so difficult? And we get into a negative mind frame as a result. So one of the first things is understanding those needs. And one of the second things is learning to set boundaries around those things and creating a vision from that in terms of what's important and meaningful for you. Because so many, like, one of the biggest struggles I see is people will not have a vision for their life because they don't know their needs. So they don't have something that's truly in alignment with them. And then we have no friggin' idea what to say yes and no to. It's like, if I have a vision and I know, look, these are the 3 things I'm going to do today to move towards that vision, and I feel inspired and clear about that, then if, Bob comes and says, hey, can you help me move today? Or, hey, can you, let's get together and drink or whatever, I know, no, that's not really going to fit in with my day and me moving towards that vision and creating further fulfillment. And so we can become really imbalanced and really sort of like leaking all over the place with our yeses and nos when we don't have that vision, when we don't have that clarity, and when we don't know our needs.
So how does someone start unpacking the deeper aspects of it? What is it? You'd go and take a Myers-Briggs personality test and go from there, or what's the best way to do that?
Good question. Yeah. So Myers-Briggs doesn't tell us our personality needs. It tells us like sort of the flavor of our personality, if anything. What we really want to get into is you can ask yourself a set of questions. And what you'll see is that research tells us very conclusively the conscious mind cannot outwill or overpower the subconscious mind. So we can have all these conscious intentions, but if our subconscious mind has a different itinerary, then it will never reach our goals. This is why you see so many people failing their New Year's resolutions. This is exactly what my experience was with addiction. Like my conscious mind going sobriety, and my subconscious being like, no, escape the pain from the past, like, numb things out. And so what you can look for when you're trying to understand your subconscious mind is that your subconscious mind is the one governing your behavior. And so you want to look for, what are the things I naturally talk about? What are the things I naturally spend my free time doing? What are the things that I can't stop thinking about, fantasizing about in the future? And you're looking for patterns within these things. What things naturally inspire you or uplift you? What do you naturally read research about? These questions, there's 13 in total. Those are the first 5. I won't go through all of them, but these questions in terms of noticing your behavioral patterns already are letting you know what your subconscious motives are.
Okay, yeah, no, I think that's really great. And honestly, that's maybe one of the better explanations I've heard of all this personality stuff. So thank you for that.
All right, that was Thais Gibson, and as Ryan mentioned earlier, it was one of those conversations that we just kind of opened up and shared our deepest, darkest secrets, and you should definitely listen to the whole thing. But next on the special mentions list is one I would say it's probably my favorite interview of the year. Second to Chris Raybould, which is also a great interview. This person is Ken Pooch. He's the director of sound at NVDVM, which essentially he is just a badass audio engineer, and he works with artists like Iron Maiden, Justin Bieber, all sorts of different, Whitney Houston, just people that you don't really come in contact with normally. He's worked with and been a part of their tours, and he really was an open book. We were able to talk to him about pretty much everything from life on the road to how he got started. And it's weird. Him and I had a lot of really kind of weird, similar, parallel paths, and it was just kind of weird to hear what he did and like, oh, I did that too. It's kind of strange, but with that said, here is a clip from our interview with Ken Pooch Van Druten.
So anyway, I had this bustling kind of recording engineer career going on, and it was a time period when there wasn't home studios. People didn't have Pro Tools on their laptops. It was pretty much like the only place that you would make records is in studios. And so I had this career that was going on. I worked on a bunch of things that got nominated for Grammys, and I was starting to build a reputation for myself, and I ended up working for a hair band called Warrant.
Nice.
And they were doing demos for their next record, and it's coming off of they had this hit record called Cherry Pie, and so I was doing the demos for whatever the next record was going to turn into be. And the guy, the lead singer, he's not alive anymore, but the lead singer turned to me and said, "Hey, we just fired our live sound guy. Why don't you come mix our show tomorrow?" And I had literally never, ever mixed a live show in my life. I had played live shows as a musician, but never paid attention to what the live sound guy was doing. Wasn't even on my radar,
So
well, if you're coming off Cherry Pie, that's Warrant at their peak. That's not like Warrant Garage.
So the end part of that story is that the next day I literally found myself mixing them in an arena at the LA Forum, opening for this other heavy metal band called Rat. And all of a sudden I was like a guy that had never mixed live sound, and now I'm sitting at a console at the LA Forum with 12,000 people. And
and I want to jump in a little bit, because there's a huge difference between a studio session and a live session, because not only do you have front of house, you have monitor mix, you have, and this is in the days of analog too. So it's not like you can just jump in and tame the beast. It's like there's a lot of different moving parts in the live show that don't exist in a studio environment. How did that go over? I mean, like in an arena forum, I don't even do live stuff because I'm a studio guy and I've never had the experience of doing live. And I am intimidated to try and go and mix a band just because of the live aspect of it. And going from studio to live has got to be night and day. How was that?
It was, and you got to realize the technology of the time for live sound was not good either. We were literally like high-fiving each other when you could hear the vocal all night. That was what it was like, it was absolutely completely foreign to me. But I tell you, in my own brain, I'm sure, I'm like, oh, that show went really well. It probably didn't go very well. But what I did fall in love with immediately was the instant gratification of 12,000 people screaming for something that you're doing, or a part of. Anytime the guy plays a guitar solo and I'm turning the guitar solo up, and 10,000 people scream for that. They're screaming for the guitar. They're screaming for the guitarist, really. But I'm a part of that. You know what I mean? And so even now, later on in my career, I still like the hair stand up on my arms when that kind of stuff happens.
Yeah.
And that made me like, I didn't even look at studio after that. I was like, yeah, whatever. This is where it's at, man.
So Ryan and I have a history of promoting shows. We did a bunch down in Phoenix, and I did a big show here in Idaho for 4,000 plus people. But it was what I'm getting at is when we promoted the shows down in Phoenix, I was the lighting guy, and I sat behind the board and I created the mood, and I created we got a drum fill, let's strobe and let's do this. And people don't realize that the lighting guy, the sound guy, the people that are involved in the show are performing just as much as the people on stage are, but the accolades aren't necessarily drawn our way because we're kind of behind the scenes. Do you still get like pre-show jitters, and do you still kind of, you're performing almost as much, if not more, than what the lead singer and the guitar player are doing? Do you still kind of get nervous coming into a big arena and okay, let's do this?
Of course. It's still very, absolutely. Right before a show starts, there's all kinds of things that could go wrong. And so, the few minutes leading up to when a show begins and all of a sudden things start feeling like everything's working, those are very tense moments even to this day.
That was Ken Pooch Van Druten, Director of Sound over at NVDVM, episode number 154 of the Eggs podcast. Obviously more than deserving of a special mention. I as Mike sort of mentioned leading up to the clip, really enjoyed the conversation with Ken. I felt like he gave us an insider's look to what's going on in their industry. Obviously, very much like Mike and the work he does as a DJ, that industry has been really heavily affected during COVID. Basically it's non-existent for many, many people now, thousands of people across the country who work in these industries, setting up stages and doing all that kind of work, the stuff behind the scenes that you just never really think about. And, there's a whole industry basically not working right now. It's a really difficult time for them. And of course we're thinking about them. They're in our hearts. But I really appreciate Ken coming on. That was an amazing conversation with an amazing guy. And, Mike and I both spent, some time in the music industry and things. And so I get a real charge out of hearing some of those stories and, what it was like running Bruno Mars's 24 karat gold show, for example. It's just incredible to think of all that goes into those things.
Yeah.
So
Bruno Mars was Chris Raybould. But they actually, Ken and Chris, both guests on our shows, they actually have a podcast of their own. And if you're an audio nerd like me, you can tune in and learn about, the right frequency to use to tune your kick drum, and what kind of compression you should use, and how you should route this and that through your mixer. And it's just kind of, nerd stuff. But if you're nerdy like me in audio, definitely check out their podcast.
Yep. They also have a YouTube channel that's worth the watch. Our final special mention here at the 2020 Eggy Awards, and the last award of the night, is Grant Aldrich. Grant was the founder and CEO of OnlineDegree.com. It was episode number 153 on the Eggs podcast. This episode, and I don't know, maybe it's an indicator of where I'm at, the end of an emotional year, but our conversation with Grant was also really interesting, not unlike the conversation with Thais Gibson, in that we went totally off the rails, but we went off the rails in sort of a deep conversational kind of way. And,
we got real.
Yeah, exactly. Well, I mean, we spent some time talking about his business and how he got started, sort of the usual stuff that we get into. But then we proceeded to get into some, like Mike said, I mean, we did get real with the guy, and we talked, a lot about our own personal experiences and his. And I felt like we really, met in the middle on a lot of really interesting topics, and a lot of just sort of personal matters that I think most people could, will have experienced in their life at one point or another. So I think it was a really important conversation, maybe beyond just sort of the normal business stuff you get from us. I think it was really valuable just in I guess, sort of demonstrating one's, willingness to be vulnerable and open yourselves up and have these kinds of conversations. And, ultimately it was a little bit therapeutic, it was a great chat, and, Grant's a great dude, and we're thrilled to death to have him on. So allow me to share this clip with you of Grant Aldrich from episode number 153.
One thing I would suggest every entrepreneur do that I think very few do is to really go through the exercise to know yourself. That's like one of the things I preach, right? Know thyself, that ancient Greek maxim. Because if you know yourself, you know what you're going to be. And again, most people never go through this exercise, sadly, but you realize what makes you happy, what you're good at, what you're not good at. And when I did that for myself personally, I came to, a lot of conclusions. One, I like being a bootstrapper. So it's your point about funding it. I raised money in the previous startup, and I just didn't want to have to go that kind of route again. I felt like I'm a bit more at home in a bootstrap. I think people are going to be happier doing it that way. And ultimately I wanted something that I'd care about. But I also think that if you're going to be doing your passion, it's very difficult for people to truly figure out how to monetize their passion. Like I talked to another guy recently who said, well, my passion is, skiing all day. I said, yeah, that might be pretty hard to come up with a business that would allow you to do that. But I think it needs to be a consideration, kind of back to that know thyself, where you really take into consideration what is going to be important for your overall everyday happiness. So for example, you may not have to be the thing that is the most passionate about, because I would say that's my family, but it's something I'm definitely very passionate about, right? I do care about, because I think that a lot of entrepreneurs, when they go through that exercise, they look at business ideas in a very traditional business sense. Will it make money? Will it scale? How much investment capital do I need? And they don't take into consideration, like, is this a right role for me? Will I even care, what happens with this business, or is it just a business? And my argument to that would be, this always takes longer than what you think it's done. It's never a 2-year stint. It's a 4-year, 5-year, 7-year stint. And so you're going to get burned out if you're not happy going through that. So to me, I know it's a long-winded question, but to come back to that, I think the core of it was I wanted to have it be mission focused because I wanted to care about it every day. I needed that for my happiness.
Yeah, that makes complete sense. I've actually been down the road where you start learning a topic or going into school and you burn out of that. The first class, I went in and was going to do real estate appraisal. Yeah. And about 2 weeks into it, I realized it's not my thing. And I'm glad I realized it then rather than 2 years down the road after I went through the whole program.
Oh man, totally agreed. Yeah. Because that's the thing. If you don't like it, well then, but I mean, if you'd, you probably feel like you're kind of fortunate, right? Because if you'd been on the other side, if you raised money, did this big thing, all of a sudden you're locked in with a lot of people's expectations for a 4-year run. Oh, you'd be miserable.
Yeah. But I mean, it's part of the deal. If you go down that road, you just have to ride through it and get past it and go on from there. But I really like what you're saying about doing a analyze yourself and figure out, am I really going to be happy in this route I'm going, and kind of base it off of that, because nothing worse than just getting into something and hating it.
Well, it's interesting. One of the things that you brought up kind of made me think, and it made me wonder if the reason most people don't go after their passion isn't, because it's easy to say, I want to do my passion, I want to chase down my passion. But I wonder if it doesn't sort of hinge on what you're saying, is that most people don't even know what their passion is. Like, they don't know themselves well enough to do that. Because I'm just, being a little reflective right here while we're talking. And, I get really jacked up about things that I'm working on and different stuff like that. But I've never probably taken much of a time to really be, analytical or critical. And I wonder if, do you have any, did you use some kind of platform to do this? Did you just, meet a great monk at a coffee shop that helped you out? Or, like, how did you find yourself? I see you're out in Irvine, I know, hey, California guys are, but, totally. I wonder if maybe.
Yeah, right. I'm just doing yoga all day. And, I wish there was a kind of an easy path to this, because you're right. I think does kind of come down to it, is that we never truly figure out who we are. Well, and the reason I love that know thyself was because I don't know if the listeners will get the background, but in ancient Greece, it was inscribed on the temple of Apollo, and which was the temple. Apollo was the god of wisdom. This was the temple of wisdom, and the idea was, how could you ever achieve true knowledge if you didn't even know yourself? And that's fascinating to kind of think about that. And that's something that almost all of us just completely neglect. So I don't think there is, I can't really, as you asked that question, it's a good question, nail down a one easy thing I did. But I did have a traumatic event. I almost died swimming in Northern California. And I think that put me in a good mindset in addition to this. So after I sold the companies, I was out swimming. I shouldn't have been out there. It was a surf advisory. I'm an idiot. I shouldn't have been out there. And it was really rough. And I got caught. And I thought, I'm like, man, this is it. I'm done. And a really traumatic event. My wife was on the beach. It was just awful. And that also helped aid this fact where you kind of come with it with a fresh perspective. And you say to yourself, well, I'm not going to waste time. This is it. That could have been it. And I really have to figure out what I want to do to be happy every day. So I think part of it as a way to frame this is to have almost like an uncompromising attitude that you have to be happy every day. And if you think of it that way, you're not going to do a lot of these missteps that we normally will tolerate to become successful. Like, for example, you wouldn't create a business where you have to be have a lot of employees if you don't like being a manager. That's me. I'm a terrible manager. Terrible. I don't even like doing it. I'm terrible. I'm not good at it. So I knew I had to do something where I'm just not going to have that. And so I think that because of those things, that I put the happiness as a big factor, which again, as we all know as entrepreneurs, you never do. You never do. That helps kind of guide you in all those decisions.
Well, and I wonder too, so much of what people seem to chase down is a little bit of, living other people's lives or living what they think others might care about or whatever. And I think that takes us just one step further away from that sort of self-recognition and, and understanding what it is that we want, because we get so clouded with what everybody else wants that sometimes it's difficult to find your spot. So also, I think you make an interesting point. In your case, it was a life-threatening moment, but I guess the recovery equivalent would be rock bottom, right? This thing that you hit where you hit a low enough low that you can make a decision or that you can pivot. And I've been toying around with this idea a little bit that rock bottom doesn't have to mean rock bottom. It doesn't have to mean the bottom of the thing. It just has to mean something that brings awareness to it. And not everybody, probably for the best, for the better, will have a life-threatening problem. Hopefully not anyway. Yeah. And so, but there has to be some sort of mental switch or some sort of something to find that moment or to have that moment of clarity where you can pivot and start, looking down a path that seems more true or will allow you to make a better judgment call. And so, and I don't know what that is. I'm just throwing it out there as kind of an idea around this idea of that moment allowed you the opportunity to now look clearly and have this new perspective on life. And I feel like there must be a way to hit that without crashing surfing.
Yeah, and I think you make a good point about that rock bottom. It doesn't have to mean that you're destitute eating out of a trash can. That could be an emotional, personal thing that you feel to make that change. I would agree with that. I think that's right.
Well, and also you got to keep into consideration too that life is just a matter of course correcting as you go. I mean, like you look at the sailors back in the day, they would check their compass and the North Star, and they'd have 3 or 4 different ways to calculate their route. And you just got to have to step back occasionally and look where you're at and say, do I want to be here? Is this going to help my end game? Is this going to accomplish my goals? And set goals and then go back and review and make sure you're doing what you're supposed to do.
And one thing, Grant, I'm not sure, I mean, maybe you intentionally said it, maybe you didn't, but right at the top of the conversation, you mentioned having failed a lot and having learned a lot from that. And I think that that's one of those things too, that so many people are afraid of, or there's stigma around, is this idea of failure. And so I wonder if you couldn't elaborate a little bit on just sort of the value of failure in sort of building businesses, founding companies, even getting to the point of an exit, just like, what were you able to learn that you wouldn't have otherwise learned, had you not failed, I guess?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think that kind of what I've chosen to do now is a culmination of that failure. Because if I look back and I ask myself, what was the greatest failure of my early 20s or my 20s, my early 30s, because I'm almost 40 now, it would have been that I got off track. Just kind of back to your compass analogy, right? That I wasn't looking down at that compass. I just left the shore and never thought to do it. And what is that? And how does that manifest itself? Well, what it does was it made me unhappy, because my goal from the very beginning, even as a little kid, just kind of take a step back, is that I always wanted freedom. And I didn't want money. Like the joke always was that if I made $1 million, I wouldn't know where to spend it. And that's still true. I have no idea. Like, because I don't care. Like, to me, it's just, I just want unfettered ability to do whatever I want. And so if you want that, and what I found in part of my early career was that I ironically became a slave in pursuit of that freedom. And because I looked at freedom being something you attain at the end of some long journey, as opposed to just living it every day. Mm-hmm. And now it's easy to say, right? As long as because like, obviously I was able to have enough food where I wasn't starving, and, you have to have a certain threshold, but that really is a true thing. And so when I look at those failures, I kind of look at the fact that I wasn't listening to myself. And I think that all stems from that. Because then when you get into like the business failures, I mean, we could talk for days. I could go over I could run I could talk for days on business failures I've reflected on, and like money that was poorly spent, bad decisions that I should have known better, how to trust, like not trusting certain vendors. All those things are great stories, but I think they're almost trivial in a sense to the greater happiness of like what you should be doing, if that makes any sense.
No, I actually kind of lived that lifestyle. Like I've money's kind of second for me. Granted, I chase it. I go after business opportunities when they come, but I've kind of, I've been a DJ for 20 years. I just kind of, I work in Lake Chelan because I like going to the lake and doing weddings there. And I like, I just kind of follow, what I like first, and then hopefully the money comes with it. And sometimes it doesn't. And that's when you go and you get a part-time job driving a truck just to, help out with that. But
yeah. Well, I'll tell you what's really kind of cool about that. So when I was in my 20s and I started one of the things I'm most thankful for, this is kind of also a little insightful, is when I was in my early 20s, just got to college, started that new startup. We weren't making anything. Just it was bare bones for years, right? Because and I was willing, I think, to be miserable to do that, because like you think you can sacrifice. And again, I think that was also being a bit of just a novice in the entrepreneurial world, not questioning, maybe is the business model wrong? Because it was. But regardless, it made me live a very meager lifestyle. And it kind of also reinforced that money shouldn't be the most thing we chase. And so I became like, I lived like a very simple Spartan lifestyle. I didn't, I just tried to enjoy every day. I really enjoyed learning, but I didn't really go out and do a lot of stuff financially. Like I have friends who would be buying boats and stuff like that, going like the Leia. I just never did it. I'd like to go do it. I think that was one of the most valuable things you can learn as an entrepreneur, is to keep your expenses low. Because if you keep your expenses low in your personal life and your business life, your stress level stays so well. Because like you said, man, like you can go do it, and then you get to go do whatever you want and be happy. And you don't have to worry about this big rent or, insert whatever that big purchase is that stresses you out and creates urgency to do things you don't want to do. Right? Because you're comfortable where you don't have to chase that money for that other job that gig you don't want, or move to an area you don't want to, because you're comfortable. You're happy where that is. That's awesome. So like for me, even after the exit, where like it wasn't like, stratosphere, but my lifestyle didn't change. Like I'll tell people what car I drive. I drive a Honda Odyssey because it's practical. I like it. And it works with my kids. It didn't change me. I think that was a big deal.
Yeah. Is it Warren Buffett that drives like the old 60s truck or did or something? You hear the stories of the guys that have $1 million and their car's just like a Pinto, and
totally.
Yeah.
Well, yeah. I mean, it's like the guy I used to work for, this guy named Don Aslett. He, you would have assumed he was some kind of crazy homeless guy, but meanwhile, pretty rich dude. And but he showed up to work every day in his painter's gear, ready to go paint stuff and covered in whatever, and just brutal. But yeah, I mean, so much of it had to do with just him. Like the money was secondary or tertiary or even further down the line. None of that really mattered.
All right, that was Grant Aldrich from onlinedegree.com, episode 153. Highly recommend you go back and listen to the whole thing. And that is it, my friends. We are done with the Eggy Awards. Big round of applause.
Can you believe it, Mike? Yeah. I mean, it's our third Eggy Awards in the bag.
Yeah. It's hard to believe, actually. I mean, we're almost to 200 episodes. So that's pretty crazy.
We are at the point this episode airs. This is episode 189. So we're literally 11 episodes off 200. And what a milestone. The way that I always reframe it to go back and just think about how much work that is and how much we've actually accomplished here at Eggs is as of today's day, 189 weeks consecutively that we've published a show. And, it's pretty incredible considering most podcasts don't get past about 4 or 5 episodes. And so I'm really grateful, to you, Mike, and just to the listeners who support the show and make it worth doing, to the guests, the people who come on. Everybody that was nominated or won an Eggy Award, but also just everybody who comes on the show. I mean, this show is sort of a gift and a curse, and that it's so nice to be able to recognize the people who came on our show and really stood out, but it doesn't pay full credence to everybody who's come on because there's just so many incredible guests. It's too difficult to factor everybody in.
Yeah. It's crazy. Really humbling to, have made it this far. And next year we have on the books some pretty amazing guests already lined up. Let's just say a very well-known author. We're not going to drop the name yet, but in the first quarter of next year, we're going to have an amazing interview with an amazing person. So kind of humbling
I think we've got some exciting stuff going on. And I think it's also sort of a tribute just to the work that we've done these last, almost 4 years now. It's, as the show's grown, the caliber of guests has certainly continued to grow. Although, honestly, if you look at some of the people we spoke to in those early years, there's not a slouch among them. I've been really impressed with the people who've been willing to share so generously their time and knowledge and everything else to come on our show. And I can't wait for what's going on in next year. I'm really excited for the guest you're alluding to, but also there are a number of other irons in the fire that I think will pan out to some really interesting stuff.
Yep.
So looking forward to it. So as this show airs, today is the 31st. It's New Year's Eve. So as we do when we do the Eggies, we want to wish you guys the best and brightest of New Year for 2021. hopefully it's a slightly less of a dumpster fire for most people.
Dude, I don't know how it could. I'm not going to say it. No, never mind. It'll be a good year. Knock on something.
Can't help but be better, right?
Yeah.
So anyway, as we come to a close here at the 2020 Eggy Awards, I've got my gin and tonic, and Mike's got his beer, and everybody, you tip one back, celebrate the fact that we've made it out alive, for those of us who have, and also pour a little out for everybody who didn't, and let's celebrate the positive aspects of this year. There's plenty of talk in the news and everywhere else about the negatives, but trying to focus your energy on the things that are useful and memorable, and keep everybody safe, happy, and healthy, and then let's do it all again next year.